Hi, it's us from Let's Talk About It, so we're going to talk about it.
Hey, we're going to talk about it.
Let's talk
All
about it. What are we going to talk about today?
well, we're going to talk about what people don't want to talk about, the 9/11 conspiracy theory.
Ooh,
Ooh.
yes. We're taking it back to September 11, 2001. And for those who were not maybe old enough or not born yet or don't live on this planet, 9/11 was a terrorist attack on our country. Four hijacked airplanes slammed into four different targets in the U.S., two of which went into the Twin Towers in New York City. One went into the Pentagon in Washington, D.C., and the other crashed in a field in Pennsylvania, never reaching its designated target, which has really been undisclosed, but it seems as though they think it was supposed to have crashed into the White House, which that alone is just silly because they have ground to air missiles around the White House, a restricted airspace there. But we'll get into all that. So basically, if you were, I guess we were in college when 9/11 happened. So
Mm-hmm.
that would put us at about 18 or 19.
Yep.
The whole world stopped, the whole world changed. What was your experience with 9/11?
So we were in college. I remember going in to take a shower. You had to carry all your stuff and your shower shoes down the hall. You had to go. I went into the shower. I felt like it was a normal. Was it a Tuesday? Why
It
do I
was a
feel like it
Tuesday,
was a
yep.
Tuesday? Okay.
It was a Tuesday, yep.
And I came out of the shower and every room in the hallway, every dorm room door was open in the entire hallway when I came out. And I just
Yep.
remember it feeling like one of those movies where you're like, what is happening? This is really weird.
Yep.
And then I had everybody had the news station on and everybody was talking about it and how I feel like right from the beginning, it was there was a terrorist attack. Um, One plane has hit the North Tower or the South Tower, then the other plane hit, and I just initially was very confused and scared. But then my initial reaction, which I never really realized until we started talking about it for Let's Talk About It,
Right.
was the way the buildings fell. I don't remember which one I saw fall at what point, but I remember seeing the building implode on itself and thinking, I'm no architect, but that seems really weird that there would be a plane at the top of this big, huge building and then it would fall from the bottom and perfectly implode on itself. Um, Even though I didn't realize that that's what I was thinking, now talking about it all these years later and thinking back, that is what I felt.
Right.
Um, Extreme fear, lots of fear within my family, within my friends. Um, Lots of they're not going to get us. We're going to show them we're the United States.
Right.
Sold out flags. You couldn't buy a flag to save your life. Um, I remember going to work that day and being told to go home, and just very, very afraid. I didn't know what to do. We had, I, when you feel like you don't have any control over a situation, that's even harder because you can't make it better. You can't do anything to fix it. You're just scared.
Right.
What about you?
Mine's pretty similar. I was headed to the shower and took my shower and was headed back, and every dorm room was open. And I remember thinking that that was odd for that time of morning. I didn't. I was up. I think I woke up after the first plane hit, so I hadn't even turned on the TV yet. So I had no idea what was happening. And then I'm hearing like the same channel all the way, the same TV channel all the way down the hall. So I get into the dorm room and I turn the TV on, and it's maybe a little past 9 at this point, and they're talking. There's this tower, and there's like black billowing smoke coming out of it. There's a huge hole in the side of it, and they're talking about. I think I was watching Katie Couric, Matt Lauer, the Today Show, and they were going on about you know how there was an accident or a bomb or whatever, and then people were calling in with these stories of what they saw or what they heard, and then as they were talking, there there was no plane. The view that they were giving us was on the other side of the South Tower, so I didn't see a plane go into it, but you could see an explosion in the South Tower and this huge fireball just billowing up into the sky, and then it turned into just black smoke just like the other tower. And they're talking about, oh my god, there's been another explosion, there's been another explosion, they keep just saying explosion. And then Matt Lauer says something like, well, run the tape back, and then they show a completely different angle than they showed before, and then you can see this like really dark black plane fly, what seemingly into the South Tower, and then the explosion. And then they had people calling in, which it was all people that worked for the Today Show, which I found really odd. Like a producer called in, and um, just people that had something to do with the show called in, and like I was on my way to work and I saw this and I heard this. The thing that caught my attention that day was when they were talking to people who were hearing secondary explosions, like throughout the event. We heard an explosion and then we saw the explosion. And then after that, we kept hearing explosions. Um, and then the other tower exploded. But we heard an explosion before the explosion. So to me, I was like, well, what the heck? Like these terrorists really, I mean, people were even saying things like they must have put bombs on the plane that went off after the plane went in the tower because they kept hearing these other explosions, right? So that's the logic that people were coming up with. And I'm standing in my dorm room and I'm having these questions, but they're flashing really quickly because they're telling me what's happening. I'm seeing what's happening. So my questions go to the wayside because they start talking about the passengers of the plane and the people jumping out of the buildings, and um, you know all of this sadness and horror. And then I get ready for my class and I head over and we sit and we talk about it for a minute, and then they cancel class and I walk back over, and as you know, our campus was really close to the airport, and they had grounded all flights that day, but only after all of the events had occurred. But they had grounded all air flights, and I thought it was so odd not to hear an airplane at all that day or see an airplane because they were so constant over the campus.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember driving up to my parents' house because you just felt this need to be with the people you loved that day. You did. And because we didn't know what was going to happen next.
Mm-hmm.
Every store was closing down. All the government offices were closing down. You didn't know what was going to happen, so you just wanted to be with the people you loved. And I
Yeah.
remember watching the tower go down, the first tower, South Tower, and it looked like it leaned, and then as it looked like the top was falling over, but as the top was falling over, it blew up, and then the rest of the tower, which I thought was weird, started to go down as well. So it's like the first half cracked off, blew, and then the rest of the tower came down. I'm like, well, how the heck did they manage that? So I'm thinking they had bombs all through that building, those terrorists. I don't know how they did it, but they must have to bring. I mean, those are huge buildings. Like they were both an acre in size, and they were they were
Yeah.
they were huge. And then the reports of like oh, a plane hit the Pentagon, and then a plane went down in Pennsylvania because we didn't know at the time, but the heroic passengers took over the plane, and then we had the hero story of the day and all this stuff. So I went to bed that night thinking, how was any of this possible? I was scared, and like you, I was confused, but I had no idea how anybody could have pulled that off. And I got on the train. I got on the bandwagon of let's go get them. We revenge. There's like 3,000
Mhm,
people dead here.
mhm.
You know, like let's go. Like what? And they told us it was because they were mad at our freedoms, and they just didn't add up. But I didn't think about it for years. All I just saw stuff about invading Iraq and Afghanistan and all this stuff going on, and thinking, why are we in Iraq? And all this. It's just so much to it. But I remember feeling so confused and scared, and I would have agreed to anything.
I was very scared too. I was very scared. I remember feeling like I wanted to be close to people that I loved and just I don't think we did anything that day except watch
Yeah.
TV all day, and it almost left you feeling as though we are raised in a country where we're told from a very young age that we're the best. We are the best. You are in the land of the free and the home of the brave. Nothing is ever going to happen to you, not without us knowing, and not without
Right.
us being able to prepare for it. And you will always be protected. And um, gosh, just being so young, you know what I mean?
Mm.
And feeling that feeling of, wow, like maybe we aren't as invincible as I thought we were. Maybe all the stories you hear in US history and everything that you're told when you are growing up isn't what anybody thought it was. Because if this could happen to us, you know.
Mm.
And then
Right.
my other thought immediately was there's got to be some people out there who really, really hate us. Like
Right.
we've done something really, really bad or
Yeah. It's like
jealousy
we
or
we took it
whatever.
really personally. Yeah, we took it personally. We're like, why? What did we
Hmm.
do?
Right. We're the best. Why
We're so
we help people. Why would we be, yeah,
right. Right. And like you mentioned, like we're programmed as soon as we start school to stand up, put our hand over our heart, and say, "I pledge allegiance to the
Yep.
flag."
Hmm.
Um, you're you're programmed from that early on to just blindly follow your government and do as you're told and believe what we say, and it's like they're priming people, they're priming children to be very patriotic, to sign up for the military once they're out of high school.
Hmm.
um
Hmm.
they make it sound like America's the best, it's the greatest.
Hmm. Oh, absolutely.
And then, yeah, and something like
Absolutely.
9/11 happened. Yeah.
oh my gosh, up until I really became an adult and actually started, like, I am not going to claim to be like a politics connoisseur at all, but once I was old enough to start reading into things myself and all of that, I really, it wasn't until then that I even had an inkling that we weren't the most amazing place to live in the world. I remember at a very young age being like it almost like how lucky are we? Like how amazing, how lucky we are to be born in the United States because we are the best, and you know, every other country could never even compare. Like we are just, you know, that's how I remember feeling. You know what I mean? Like every other country, they don't know what they're doing. They're not as well equipped, and they're dumb, and they're, we're we are it. Like we are what everybody wants to be. Everybody wants to come to the United States. Everybody wants a better life for themselves. And the only way they're ever going to have that is if they come here.
Right.
And how lucky you
Hmm.
are to have grown up here and speak English and,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, and I think we're programmed as children to be patriotic and follow our country and believe in God. But I feel like when we grow up that way, we are controlled and
Mhm.
we don't realize it. We're given freedoms, they're so-called freedoms, um, and we're not told the truth. From being a little kid, you remember learning about Thanksgiving and Columbus and how wonderful Columbus was and how Thanksgiving was this peaceful thing. I mean, come on, when you grow up and you look into this genocide that started our country. And then we went through what,
Uh,
200, 300 years of slavery that made us the wealthiest country in the world because we didn't pay for labor. Uh, it seems to me that we were never the greatest country, and we were
mhm.
all lied to. History was glossed over, and nowadays things are coming out, and that's why I think 9/11 is so important to look at, because I think the American public, the world, we were all duped. It was a
Mhm.
psychological attack on Americans to obey, to follow, to, you know,
Mhm.
it's outrageous. And
You
I
instill fear
I
in
fell into
people
it.
and mhm.
Yeah. I bought everything they said.
Yeah.
Even though I
Yeah.
questioned things, I bought into it. And then they would show, back then, I think my parents and I watched Fox News. They don't anymore, obviously, but like they were telling, like, the celebrities and you know, uh politicians were questioning things about 9/11, and those who did not vote or support the war were were canceled, and they call today a cancel culture. We've always had cancel culture. Look at the Dixie Chicks. They spoke out about
Mhm.
the war and the
Yep.
backlash they got for that,
Mhm.
just for
Yep.
saying, Bush is not our president, because they didn't support his choice to go to war with a country that had nothing to do with 9/11. They were canceled immediately. So we were
Anybody,
trained in that way, not to speak out or not to question anything.
yeah, absolutely. I never would have thought to question something. Like you go to school, this is what you learn in school. This is what it is. I
These are facts.
do I do consider myself lucky in a way when I hear of others who grew up in very, very, very deep rooted religion, because I feel like those lines are very
Hmm.
blurred
Yes,
between
because
religion and what you're taught and history and politics and all that stuff. And so as I've gotten older, I've almost
hmm
appreciated growing up pretty much agnostic, because I feel like it really I didn't have that extra line to be blurred. You know what I mean? Like we had enough that was blurred on its own, but without that, I was,
yes,
you know, that kind of makes things a little more hazy, in my opinion. But
I think
yeah,
yeah, I think it leaves your mind open. I think religion has been the cause of many wars and terrible situations, but I think people with deep rooted religion tend to support their government more because they're so easily swayed. They're gullible people. It's almost sad. It's like it's not even their fault. That's how they were raised. They were raised to believe in a
yeah,
man in the sky who's watching
yeah,
every single thing you do, every
yeah.
decision you make, and every thought you have. So they're programmed that way. And then
Hmm.
the government and politics, especially, I mean, it's on both sides, but especially on the Republican side, is God and country, God and country, God and country. don't question it. We're the best. They're the most gullible, and they outnumber people like us who are free thinkers.
Mhm. I I just think it takes so much of your personality away from you as a human to just constantly agree with everything just because you're being told that. I think you can't be your own person, right? Like you can't
Right.
come to
Right.
conclusions on your own and be your own person, or when religion is so ingrained in everything you do and you're going to church 3 times a week and you're, you know what I mean? Like I have been very close to people who have been super religious growing up, and any stories are never like, oh, it was so great because, it's always like, we had to this, we had to that. And you're right, I think you raised a good point as far as it kind of makes you feel bad for them because it's almost not even their fault.
Yeah.
Um and they don't care that they don't have the answers. Even if you were to question somebody like that, it does not make them bat an eyelash that they don't have an answer to your objection, because ultimately it doesn't matter anyway, because they're never going to not believe what they have believed their whole life. um and it
Right.
isn't really their fault. Like how can you blame somebody who's been told something every day for their entire life? Like that's not.
Right.
It's sad.
Yeah.
It's sad to
It's
just put your head down and never question anything.
oh,
That's a hard life to
mm.
live. That's a hard
it's
life to
almost
live.
it's almost
How do
enviable
you
because it's almost enviable because it's almost like ignorance is bliss. Like these people, they don't care. They don't have to care. They're just like, what I
Yeah.
think is right, what you think is wrong, and I'm gonna believe it. And you're not gonna tell me this, that, or the other thing. While we're over here going, oh my God,
Mhm.
like our country attacked itself for oil,
And those
and we,
people aren't ever going to be open to conversations because they don't care. It doesn't matter what your side of the story is. There you could show them a video of a black man being killed
mm-hmm.
in real time.
And they'd be
And
like,
they still
well,
will deny it. Like you can't argue with stupid or whatever that saying is. Like you can't, like there's no. And is it worth your time? Is it worth putting, like, even when you have the most compounded evidence that person that's like, well, it's not really real, and it's like, I can't because it makes my brain hurt.
I know, and even like you bring up a good point because it's like even with us doing this, um, sort of podcast deal, it may make someone think for a moment outside the box. Um, I was, or it may not, but I remember being very pro President Bush for it. I was not pro Bush before 9/11. Then I was pro Bush. And then, I felt like, wow, maybe I'm a Republican because I'm agreeing with everything that they are saying. And so I didn't really identify as a Republican, but I followed along. And then, years later, Fahrenheit 9/11 came out. And
Mhm.
I remember watching Michael Moore's Bowling for Columbine and being like, well, let's just see what he has to
Mhm.
say because Bowling for Columbine was an eye opener about gun control. And so watching Fahrenheit
Mhm.
9/11 opened my eyes to the possibility that maybe they let it happen. And so I thought that for many years that the Bush administration just ignored all the warnings and they let it happen so they could go to war. And so they could, because war makes money, and so that they could, you know, take all of Iraq's oil, take over their country, occupy their country. And then one day, I was browsing through Netflix. This was years later, of course, because back then there was Netflix. Remember, you had to like rent a DVD online, and they'd send it to you in the mail, and then
Yes.
you'd put it back in the
Yes.
mail.
Yes.
Yeah, right. And you had a
And
queue
you
and
had to
everything
return it.
of what
Yep.
would be sent next. Yep. Well, this was like, okay, now Netflix has like streaming. So I'm going through and I see this thing called In Plain Sight. And I might have mentioned it to you back then. Um, and it was just this little rinky dink homemade sort of analysis of 9/11 from this guy, some random guy, right? And I watched it and I was like, oh my goodness, maybe there's more to 9/11 than just them letting it happen. Perhaps they made it happen. And so that opened my
Yeah.
mind to wanting to know more. So I would look up other documentaries, and like I found Families for 9/11 Truth, Firefighters for 9/11 Truth, Police for 9/11 Truth, Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. The list went on and on, and I was like, I had no idea that there was this underground movement to bring out the truth and
Mm-hmm.
justice for all of those people who died on 9/11. So I just dove into it, and I got sucked down the rabbit hole. And everybody I mentioned it to, except you, were like, they were like, I don't know about that because it just doesn't seem like something that our government would do to us. And they thought, like I tried to talk to my dad about it, and he was like, no. And actually, I talked to my mom about it, and she actually, you know, agrees with me that there was something fishy about that. But everybody else was kind of like, you're crazy. But you were automatically like, really? Well, let me look into it. And not everybody has that mentality.
Right.
Not everybody is
Right.
like, okay, hang on, I'll look into that and I'll get back to you on what I think. And so, you know,
Well,
we sat on it for
that's the
years,
power
would talk
of,
about it, but
yeah, I think that's the power of being able to be your own person and live in this great country and have your own freedom, right? Is like when someone brings something up to you that
right,
you have the ability to look into it yourself and not just say,
right,
well, no, our government wouldn't do that. Like, you know, um,
right.
but I'm
You're
glad we're
crazy.
talking
That's
about it.
I'm glad we're
Yeah,
talking about
yeah,
it too
like you're
because
nuts. Like,
we we brought it up like when we've gotten together sometimes. We brought up other conspiracies that we've heard about, like Sandy Hook maybe being another gun control thing, or false flags. This 9/11 was a huge false flag.
people get so defensive too. Like it happened to them
Yeah.
personally. And that's
Hmm.
where they've really won in doing all these things to us because they have hit a part of people's personalities that they have become a patriot for the country. And so they really did a fabulous job. They couldn't have done it any better because I remember mentioning to somebody at the time when you were talking about the Sandy Hook stuff. I remember saying that to somebody, and this person became very upset with me that I would even insinuate that something would be
Right.
not correct. And I said to this person, do you know
Hmm.
anybody at Sandy Hook? Well, no. Do you know anybody that died at Sandy Hook? Well, no. Well, then, is it really outlandish to say something like that? Like it's drilled and drilled and drilled. And instead of this person saying to me, you know what? I've never heard of that and it sounds kind of kooky, but let me do a little bit of research. We just want to believe the story because it's easier too, right? It doesn't take time. You don't have to research anything. You just go, you be a sheep, as they say, and just go
Yep.
along with the story because that's easier. That's the fastest thing to do. That's the quickest thing to do. And why would your government lie to
Right.
you? I think
um
it's a good thing to
and
talk
that's
about.
like,
I think this year is the 20-year anniversary, so
yeah, I think
it's
a
important, I
little
think.
refresher in Yeah. Yeah, and there's a lot to it that we'll get to. Um,
Yep.
I think you, it's easier to make one person the boogeyman rather than, you know, admitting, like, look at JFK. Everything we know about that assassination now, we know that Lee Harvey Oswald was not the guy that did that. We know that there were multiple people shooting. We know that there were multiple angles. The DNA, the autopsy, everything doesn't add up. And for some reason that's more easily believable for people. But some people are still, staunch supporters of their Warren Commission report, which was like, so Lee Harvey Oswald was the guy that did it, and that's it, end of story. It's not. It's not the end of the story.
Right. Right.
Just like 9/11 is not the end of the story. There's
Right.
so much to it. Um, so what we can talk about very, for our first little bit here, and then we'll work on another part to this. It's just the hijackers. That this leads into the hijackers and how it's just impossible for these 19
Mm-hmm.
so-called hijackers, which some are still alive. Uh, they're finding that they've already found years ago that these hijackers are coming. They came forward. They're like, uh,
Right.
these hijackers
Well,
would
and
never
I
have been
feel like
capable of.
it was so fast that we had the picture of the 19 hijackers is like burned in my memory because I feel like I saw it so much on the news. Like I feel like it's
Yeah,
just like right there. Like I can just see it. I can see all their faces. And it felt like that
right.
photo came out instantly. Like it was like how in the world would you know? How could you possibly know? How and you have all their names. Like, oh my gosh, Like, how
That
could
was
you
really
know
quick.
all those
Yeah.
people? No videos of them being in any airports at all or boarding any planes at all.
Yeah, the
But,
information came out very quickly. Yes, yes. And
yeah,
going back to they were making a big deal about their They were not trying. They were not what we were told is like deeply religious suicide pilots. These guys were out partying. These guys were making their presence known. They were not trying to hide anything. They were creating their storyline, like you said earlier, and they weren't shy about it. None of them could fly. They've interviewed their flight instructors. None of them could fly a little Cessna plane. None of them got their pilot's license. None of them. How do you go from that to hijacking a fully loaded aircraft with box cutters, uh, taking over an airplane that you know nothing about, defying the laws of physics to crash them at sea level at 500 miles an hour into towers, or you know along the ground at the Pentagon. We bought the stories because we weren't physicists, and we weren't architects or engineers, and we didn't
right,
understand that those things were freaking impossible. You can't just take over an
right,
airplane with very little knowledge of a Cessna. You can't.
right,
There, the
right,
controls alone, we would have had to sit there and be like, what do I do? What do I push?
right.
What happens next?
Well, and the struggle, right? Like the struggle of killing somebody with a box cutter. I mean,
Right.
okay. Um, I don't even remember if there ever were specifics on that or how they would ever even know. Oh, they sliced their throats? Really? How do we know that? Like, like how would you ever know? But I feel like the struggle of trying to kill somebody and remove them from a cockpit, the plane would already be down. The plane would be
Case in point,
done
yes.
at
Case
that
in
point.
point, the crash in
Like you wouldn't,
Pennsylvania,
you
the one in
couldn't,
Pennsylvania.
right, right.
The passengers stormed the cockpit. and supposedly stormed the cockpit and were struggling with the hijackers. That plane went down, supposedly because of the struggle.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you got three other airplanes where you're struggling with pilots that are not going to give up their seats easily. They're trained not to do that.
Right. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
how does
Yeah.
it how does it make any sense that they could have just so easily just got, I don't know. It doesn't add up. And then to fly these airplanes with precision into towers, it just doesn't seem like it's possible. Pilots will tell you today it's impossible to do the maneuvers they did. It's impossible to fly through
Mm-hmm.
that airspace at that speed. So right there, if you've got a whole group of pilots telling you that this doesn't add up, right there you got to start asking questions.
Right. Right. And none of them had their commercial pilot's license. And most of them, when their instructors or fellow students were interviewed, most of them said that they were terrible and that they couldn't even
Right.
fly. I don't remember, like the littler planes, the easier planes, they couldn't even fly them because they were so bad. So, how, like, if an experienced pilot of 30 plus years couldn't do the maneuvers as fast and as quick as these supposed commercial planes were going, how is somebody who barely speaks English and barely doesn't even have a license to fly, how are they able to do it? And then the other thing is
Yeah.
how ironic that our air defense, half of our air defense, or more than half, was on exercises for hijacking that day. So
Yeah,
much that
they
it
had
was
war games.
confused by the air traffic controller. They were confused because when they called in a hijacking, they said, "Is this real or is this training?" Because they were literally training that same day
Mm-hmm.
for hijacking.
Right.
I,
And they
I
had all the
can't. The
simulations
irony
on the
with that
screen.
is too
Yeah.
much. Yes, that's too
And
much. That's too
by the
much.
time
Like,
any of them could have, yeah, by the time any of those fighter jets could have been scrambled, everything was over. Everything was over by the time any of
right.
them could get out to intercept an airplane. It takes
Hmm.
them normally about 10 minutes from ground to air to intercept a hijacked
Yes.
airplane.
Yeah.
But they were all
Yeah.
over the place. We didn't have any.
Hmm. Hmm.
And then if they did find one or they found a couple, they sent them out into the ocean. They're like, tell us where to go. And they gave them coordinates to go out over the ocean rather than where they needed to be. And for four airplanes to fly around for like almost an hour and a half without being intercepted is unbelievable. It's
Hmm.
unbelievable.
We have the best air defense in the world, but yet we weren't able to get it together enough because we were so confused. You can hear the
Oh, yeah.
confusion in the air traffic controller's voice. They're talking to each other, but they have no idea what's going on because half of their planes are in
Right.
training, and then the other half are training for these hijackers. It's like it's I want to know how many times a year the United States trains specifically on hijackings.
For war games. Yeah.
Something
Like they
tells
do have
me
war
it's
games, but
not.
like specifically
Yeah.
hijacked airplanes. Yeah. Yeah. So
Yeah.
that's like one of the early first, blunders and coincidences, right? And then you have
Yeah.
your top
Definitely.
brass all missing, all missing that day. Not a person
Yes.
in charge. And then
Yep.
whoever was left in
Yep.
charge didn't know what they were doing. Yeah, or didn't have clearance to make decisions.
And two of the people that were left in charge it was literally like their first week on the job or something like that. They had no idea
Right.
how to answer the questions
And our
because they didn't have enough experience.
and our Secretary of Defense couldn't be found anywhere. And when he does show up,
Nope.
he's outside the Pentagon carrying, people out of the rubble and like, shouldn't you be somewhere behind a desk on a phone?
Mm-hmm.
You know,
I
like
I'd like to know
it's
how often that happens too. Like, how often are you not able to get the Secretary of Defense? Something tells me that job's probably pretty important, and you need to be notified where you are at all times, I would imagine. But
right. And you
yeah,
show up after everything's over and yeah.
yeah, and then you're like, oh wait, what? What happened? Something happened
Oh,
here?
let me help with the victims and not get to work, you know.
Out of
Let's
8 people
see.
that were like
So they went
commander in chief, I believe that 6 of them were like had the day off or decided to go on a hike or something that day. But every person that would have been in
well even
charge was not available.
right. And even the president of the United States is told that America's under attack and he doesn't move a muscle. So I feel like the Secret Service would have just rushed in there, picked his ass up out of that seat, gotten him on Air Force One, and gotten him to a secure location. He'd never moved a muscle, and they didn't
Yeah.
even come in to get him. That's their first priority. America's under attack, and our president's sitting. You know,
Yeah.
the press gets an itinerary of where the president's going to be. So if hijackers can coordinate a precision attack like this, why wouldn't they know where he is? They would know, right? So don't you think the Secret Service would whisk
Mm-hmm.
him out of there? He even held a press
Mm-hmm.
conference from the same place after everything that happened.
Mm-hmm.
So nothing seems
Too
to add
many
up with the
coincidences that make it
hijackers.
all seem like it was
Yeah,
literally planned. There's too many things. There's no way that all of those
yeah.
things, from the training hijacking to the commanders all being gone to the Secret Service not whisking him away to there's too many things for all of that to not be planned out. There's
And
you
that's
can't. There's no way.
that, no, no, and that's just the beginning. That's just the tip of the iceberg.
Because of all
Um,
the trainings, there was only 4 planes that were actually in the air protecting that part of the United States. When normally I think they said there
and
would
they
be
were
upwards of
given.
30 or 40 something.
I think what I read was, or what I remember seeing was we normally have about 300 defending um, the United States or ready to defend.
Okay.
Um, but they took all of the planes that would be helpful to the most vulnerable parts of America went out on war games that day. So you have
Right.
the blundering idiots at the Pentagon and the White House. You have the amazing hijackers with amazing abilities that defy physics and logic, and you know, who managed to sneak past any security footage in the airports. We
Yep.
have
Yep.
uh,
Magic.
no response from Bush. It's all a coincidence that we're just blundering idiots when we're supposed to have the best defense in the world.
I think lots of, and I hate to laugh because it's not funny, but it just, as you list all of these things off, you can't help but think the greatest country in the world would have this many miss falls in the same day. There's no way. We're too much on top of our
I
game
know.
for so
Yeah.
many different reasons, right? Like,
Yeah. But if they can
yeah.
blame that on, oh, whoops, we didn't know what was that they were going to do that. We weren't ready for it. We weren't set up for it. Then the incompetent uh, reason comes in, and they just blame it on, oopsie.
Hmm. I was just going to say that even if we had no idea, I still think we would have been able to react a lot faster and a lot quicker had that been an actual situation, because there's no
Right.
way that we could have been that overly underprepared for something. I don't believe that.
No, no. They made it so we were underprepared.
Yeah.
So that's this segment of 9/11, and we will be talking about more current events in between our 9/11 in-depth chit chat. We can pop on and do some more current events. But this is our first attempt at this because we think this is an important issue. We think it caused a lot of issues along the way, and it is the anniversary actually of 9/11. So we are the let's talk about it gals.
Yes.
So let's talk about it.
Thank you for joining us for this episode
We're
of
going to
Let's
talk about
Talk About It. And we're going to keep talking about it. We're always going to talk about it. So we will
it. We're always going to talk about
see you
it.
guys next time. Yes. So much talking about it.
We're going to talk it to death. I'm obviously alive. I wasn't on the plane.